Right, here's where we're at on the holster. I think last when we left off, we were gluing the two sides together, but since then, I've punched the belt slots on through, and I'll show you real quick. This slot's a little bit wider, so the belt can pivot on it. And if you look, if I take this, put it through here, it'll sit at that angle on that belt loop, and then at that angle on the other belt loop. They're made for a 1.5 inch gun belt. So my personal belt is a 1.5 inch double layer hand stitch, 2 layers of 9 ounce gun belt. So, you know, it makes a handy gauge. Also, what I've done is I went ahead and I sanded the edges, beveled them using my edge beveler. You know, after you sand it, you just go through, bevel off your edges, touched them up with a bit of dye, did the same thing with the inside of the belt slots, and now I'm punching the stitch holes in it. And I thought I'd just bring that up real quick. The way I do this is I use my little 2-holer because that's curvy. On the straight ones, I went ahead and used my 4-hole punch. That's just my preference. I think that 4 prongs or 4 holes, I think that's plenty as far as I'm concerned. On these is a combination of wear, but what I've done is I've removed the coating and I've smoothed with a extra fine Arkansas oil stone. I smoothed them. Then I took and I sharpened the ends of them a little bit. Took my strop and stropped them. So they're nice and smooth and they slide through the leather easier. And I keep them sharp by stropping them. So they go through the leather easier. Now what I'm doing is, first thing I'll do before I actually punch the holes is I'll lay them out. So I'm going to start at this end. I've already, I don't know if you can see that. See if I get this light over here. Put where I marked where the stitch line is going to go. Then I'm going to follow that line, not punching through yet, but just tapping. And the idea basically is to mark where the stitch holes are going to go. That way I'll be able to determine if I'm coming exactly back to the starting point. I'm going to continue doing this, and I'll be right back. Okay, I put all the little dents in. That was the idea, just give it a little bit of a dent to give you kind of a guide. The idea is before punching the holes on through, I want to see how they're going to meet up with these holes on the ends, because I want it to look good. I don't want the stitch line to look all wonky. So I went ahead and I just tapped this and did all that, and I found that I was very close to meeting on the end. So when I punched my first couple of stitch holes, I had to squeeze them over just a little bit and then punch them on through to get to look the way I want to. Now I'm going to go ahead and just punch the stitch holes as I go along. And first thing I do is I put my chisel in place, and I put it so I can eyeball it and make sure it's straight, and just pound it on through. And since I put those little dents in there, I can do 2 holes at a time. Otherwise, I would have to index off the last hole and then do the next hole, instead of just move it over to the 2 dents and to the next section rather. Just take, eyeball it. A lot of people ask, how do you get a straight stitch line on the backside? And it all has to do with how careful you punch the holes, obviously. It seems like no matter how careful I am when I punch my holes, I always have one spot, I can't see any right here, well, it'll be a lot more evident what stitches are in. There's always a spot where it's crooked. It always seems to happen. Like no matter how careful I am, there might be 1 or 2 stitches out of line. Most people won't notice this, but I do. Okay, when we come back, we're going to go ahead and burnish these edges. As before, these edges here, those are burnished. That was already burnished before I glued it together. You can see how difficult it would be to do it afterwards, even after it's molded, because of the shape of it, like that. It would just be more difficult to burnish that because of all the shapes. You can use this end, or use a deer antler, but it's easier just to do them while it's straight and before you glue it together. So I'm going to go ahead and keep on punching these stitch holes, and next up will be the burnishing. A little loose bit there. And we'll go ahead and eventually we'll get this thing stitched up. After that, we'll get it molded, etc., etc., and it'll start really looking like a real holster, because basically it'll be a real holster. So we'll be back to do some burnishing. See you then.